Are we live? Are we on? We are on. Hello, guys. This is Craig Graves, your co-host of the Through a Therapist Dives podcast. Coming at you today from episode 8 on addiction and the Minnesota model. So Chris and I kind of went back and forth on this Minnesota model concept when it comes to addiction, because what he says here is that addiction, alcoholism and drug addiction and those kind of things we're either born with that or not. So we're born addicts or not. And, I can see his point. I could see his point from some respects because, and I say this on the segment, I know people who can go out to dinner and have a drink, have a glass of wine or a whiskey or a beer, and that's it. They go home, go to bed. There's other people who can't do that. One drink leads to just drinking themselves silly until they pass out. Okay, so I see that, but I don't see people who casually use hard drugs like cocaine or crack. I might go have a beer after work. I don't know anybody that says, I'm going to go smoke some crack after work, or I'm going to go shoot up after work. And then they get up and go to work the next day. So listen to the little segment here on the Minnesota model and what Chris says about addiction being kind of in our DNA, and we'll talk again on the other end.
So before I do, I kind of like to see your brain, Craig, in sort of a basic way. These topics that we've got, I thought about you too, man. You keep doing this, man. You're gonna be a bona fide expert in short order on a lot of therapy topics, man.
I'm learning as we go, for sure. There's a lot of learning going on in my mind.
And
Yes.
you do learn when you have focus on something, and you're like hitting this every week.
Yeah, it's interesting to me that some of the things we've talked about are things that I do have a little bit of knowledge on, like with the CBT,
Sure.
Being Eastern and stuff like that, and mindfulness and some of those other things. So it's been a good experience, and we don't get together and talk about these things before the show.
Purposeful.
So I learn a lot just on the show. And, some things you said with that intro have got my interest piqued about misunderstanding, substance abuse, and things like that. So I'm looking forward to seeing where this goes.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting, and I purposely kind of have that in my brain because I really like your genuine reaction to stuff. And you're right, we don't talk a lot. I mean, we talk about a lot of things over the time that I've gotten to know you, but I'm going to do it again. I mean, you've just seen a pattern in our shows where I've kind of started out asking you, what are your thoughts about this? So addiction, substance abuse, a lot of phrases I just threw out there. How do you see all of this? What is substance abuse? What is addiction?
Substance abuse to me and addiction is it's when people become, I guess, physically dependent upon drugs or alcohol as part of their daily routine. And just let me say that I've never had issues with substance abuse, but I do know a lot of people that have had issues with that. I sat in on a jury one time where I was actually had jury duty.
Oh.
And the young man that was on trial was accused of trafficking cocaine and possession of a firearm or something like that.
There is some serious stuff that goes on with all of the trafficking really right here in our little hometown.
Right here in town, yeah.
I mean, trunks full of stuff that would blow your mind.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. One of the questions they asked the jury pool, and I didn't have to go up, and they chose the jury before I had to go up there and answer questions. But one of the questions they asked was, do you know someone who has been directly affected by drug addiction? And dude, I counted over 20 people that I know personally who've had addiction issues or struggle with addiction. And that was just off the top of my head, So, I've seen what drug addiction does, and I don't want to give too many examples of situations that I've seen on this podcast.
And we want to respect their privacy.
Yeah, because people,
personal.
I may give an example of somebody who knows me and may be listening, so I'm not going to do that. But I have seen what addiction can do to not only the person, but to their family and their friends as a result of their problem.
And it is, we well know, an entire family issue. There's a whole lot of information that we have about that since the 1970s. 60s really as it relates, which is a good transition. A lot of what my training is based in is from what is called the Minnesota model. More on that in a second. I kind of lucked out in that my first gig as a anything therapist world was teaching a DUI class, and it was up in West Virginia for DUI offenders that were trying to get their license back. And I just took over this little 18-hour education course, and teaching that thing over and over and over again really solidified the basics of understanding of addiction at the time that we had through that education. And if I had not had that, I would have fallen into a trap that you're going to hear me talk about in our field that I think people are in, where they don't know about alcoholism or drug addiction or substance abuse. We're not automatically trained with this stuff. I kind of lucked into it, and I'm really, really glad that I did right from the get-go. And that was really, really crucial for me, and sort of lucky for me when I was a young green clinician. So the Minnesota model is what I want to highlight right here from the get-go, because it's a foundation that has been kind of supported by science, I would say, and somewhat science has kind of gone against it a little bit. And that's a really confusing thing that I want to kind of clear up a little bit. And in our dialogue, I think that we'll be able to do that. But the Minnesota model started in the 1950s in a state mental hospital by two young men, one who was to become a psychologist, the other who was to become a psychiatrist, neither of whom had prior experience treating addicts or alcoholics. That comes from, NCBI, we'll have show notes, kind of gives proper credit and whatnot, but their abstract of an article they wrote is what I'm going by. And interestingly enough, they point out how this thing spread to a small non-for-profit organization. Their model of addiction, you'll recognize, spread very quickly to a place called Hazleton. You ever hear of Hazleton?
I don't think so.
Really? The Hazleton Foundation is a huge, well-known agency now, foundation that is a really strong leading authority on addiction issues. And then it spread very quickly throughout the country. The Minnesota model really interestingly blended professional and trained non-professional recovering staff around the principles of a program that I'm sure you've heard about, Alcoholics Anonymous.
Yes.
Okay. They have a strong participation in Alcoholics Anonymous and their model. And it's called the disease model because it is clearly believed by many, many, many in the field that biological addiction is had at birth. So babies are either an alcoholic or not. That's the fundamental disease model foundation. And so from that, we derive the goal, the only safe goal that we know with addiction is abstinence. You cannot use mind and mood altering substances when you have addiction. And that's an important point to kind of understand that a lot of people get very confused about. Because if you don't have addiction, you move your behavior into controlled use. But for an alcoholic with the Minnesota model, which I am really heavily based in and believe in, you find that you could try abstinence, but it doesn't work. And there's a fundamental difference with substance abuse, which is the term that we use. You can abuse a substance and not have addiction. Prior shows we talked about, self-soothing in destructive ways, buying stuff, being sexual and all of that. Well, substances are a big piece of that.
Yeah, so let me stop you there. So you're saying that this model says that people are born addicts.
Essentially.
Okay.
I put it that way to help people understand the true genetic biological markers that many believe are the basis of why people have the crazy behavior that they have with drugs and alcohol.
Right. Okay. That's interesting because there's a couple things I would point out there. I know people who are, let's use alcohol as an example. I went to college, and so, we partied in college and that kind of deal.
Right.
And so, there are people who can, like you said, you might abuse alcohol on a Friday or a Saturday night, but then carry on a normal life after that. Whereas
Absolutely.
I've seen other guys who can't have one drink. They have, if they go one, it's all out.
It's on or off.
Yeah, so there's a definite distinction there between the guy who's addicted to alcohol versus who's not. Maybe not how they handle themselves on a particular night, but over an extended period of time.
Correct.
Right? Does that make
Correct.
sense?
It's almost, I can't speak intelligently about it, but man, there's almost a different biological process that people have in breaking alcohol down, and I haven't heard a whole lot of that over the years, and it might be just because I've been very clear in my brain, so I'd be curious what current biological digestive research would say about things. But in one conference early on in my career, I really remember them talking about how in a typical situation, you ingest a beer and 100% of it is eliminated through various ways of your body.
Right.
The alcoholic has the same process. However, 99.7% of it is eliminated, and the other percentage they broke down, it's not being eliminated.
Right. That's interesting. So let me ask you this, though. There are certain, like alcohol, for example. People can drink on a Friday night and then clean up on Sunday. Go to church, whatever they do.
Yeah.
And then be fine through the week.
Sure.
But I don't know anybody who's shooting heroin or smoking crack on a Saturday night who's not addicted. So is it also dependent upon the
drug of
chemical,
choice?
the
You're
drug
talking
of
about
choice?
drug
Yeah.
of choice. No.
Interesting.
No, the reality is a lot of times when you get into the different drugs, cocaine and crack and heroin and pills and people that do huffing, they'll breathe in paint fumes. And I mean, there's so many things. There's so many drugs of choice that are out there that people are using. And somebody who has addiction, that you'd never know they were shooting up at lunch.
So, Chris and I kind of went back and forth a few times on the show when it comes to this. And then, much to my dismay, we had an expert on the show. I think it was the show we had with Dr. Paul Weigle, and he confirmed what Chris said. So Chris is right. I have to admit I'm wrong on that one. But it's still very interesting because, again, I don't really see a lot of people use hard drugs. I mean, look at the opioid epidemic. Are all those people who are affected by opioids predisposition to addiction? And I think the answer to that's, I think personally, I'm not the expert, but I would say that it's not. I don't know. I don't know. But it was a new concept. That Minnesota model, being born with those personality traits, was something that was completely new to me. And if you have interest, I would encourage you to go back and listen to episode 8 on addiction and the Minnesota model, and also the episode with Dr. Weigle. And I can't remember which one that was, but it was on screen time and gaming addiction in children. Dr. Weigle was an expert on that particular topic and was gracious to come on the show and share his thoughts with us on those topics. So I'd encourage you to go back and listen to those too, okay? Chris and I have a new way to support the show. If you go to our website, there is a link to Whole Family Products on our website, and they have over 126 supplements, nutritional supplements, including CBD oils and creams and sleep aids and natural hormone creams and lots of good products, over 126 things to choose from. But you have to go to our site first, throughwhattherapists.com, click on the link, and go to their website and purchase. All right, guys, and once again, I'd love to hear your feedback, especially on this topic. You can go to our website and click on the Contact Us link, or you can send an email directly to Chris at contact@throughwhattherapists.com, and we would love to see you. I'd love to hear from you guys, and we'll be back with more great content very soon.